Hello everyone, I am getting ready to do my tutorial on how to speed paint Lannister troops after a zenithial highlight. This is my second attempt at making the video. The first video I had recorded in pieces while doing up some of the Lannister crossbowmen. After assembling everything together, the video quality was just not there. My camera really wanted to keep doing autofocus, and I've got that turned off right now, so hopefully this will look better. And we are going to go over with the Lannister guardsmen this time. And the big things we're going to cover is effective ways to do metallic quickly so it looks good on a model such as this, and how to take advantage of already having the shading on the model to use a combination of inks and very translucent paint to get instant shading and highlighting so you can get on to the next model. I'm going to go a little more in depth on painting a higher quality on the banner than I do on the soldier, and with that, that's going to make this model take a little longer, but by following the basic method, you should be able to churn out a model in about an hour. So that is what we are aiming for with this. I've been able to do it with other models. Might take a little longer as I talk through it, but it should be somewhere around there. Of course, if you are doing this in assembly line type fashion, you're going to notice this goes a lot faster than just painting one model at a time. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at doing the red on this model. So for the red on this model, I am going to use, to start, some Liquitex matte medium. I'll put just a little bit of that on my wet palette. Now for the wet palette, I have a store-bought Masterson Stay Wet Handy palette that has seen quite a lot of use. But you'll notice on the inside I don't have the standard yellow sponge or the Stay Wet paper. I find the Stay Wet paper is too thick that they sell for this. It's great for a full-bodied acrylic that you would use as an artist. If you are painting miniatures where you're using inks and miniature paints, they're already very thin, don't have as much of a body, and they won't get enough moisture through that type of paper to keep them pliable and usable. So I am using instead just regular parchment paper that you can buy in any kind of cooking section of a grocery store. And for the sponge, since they always tend to get all nasty looking anyhow, I am just using some folded up paper towel that I have soaked in water. So that's what we're looking at right here. All right, so once I have that in place, I've got my Liquitex matte medium. Next, I'm going to use Liquitex's Crimson ink, and the Crimson ink is fairly transparent. You can do this with paint as well, or with ink. You can use P3's red ink, that works, or you can make a combination of Scorn red, which I haven't pulled out of my box, but you can use Scorn red and a little bit of red ink, depending on what you're looking to do. The Scorn red is going to add some more opacity to it, so if you want to make sure that there is more color in your shadows, you might want to use some paint. I don't want to lose my shadows, so I'm going to go with something a little more transparent. Now, just the P3 red ink, I have noticed, isn't as transparent as the Liquitex. If you look into various inks, a lot of companies will list the transparency of their inks. So, like, let's see, I've got some FW ink. I use a lot of this. If you go onto their website, they do list whether it is a transparent ink. Actually, I think I've got it right down here. Yeah, there's going to be a little T, a little S, or a little O right there. So that is either transparent, semi-transparent, or opaque. So that can help you decide how you're going to use that kind of ink. So we're just going to take a little bit of this, drop her some red on there, and that's what we're going to start with. Normally with models, I would start with going from the inside out, so I start with the flesh tones, but with doing this kind of glazing, I like to get that real quick amount of color on there as fast as possible, so that's what we're going to work on doing. So I'm just going to take some of this medium, put it off here to the side, scoop up some of the ink, mix that in there. The medium's just going to help the ink stay where I put it. Okay, so now what we're going to do is start with the glaze. We're going to start on the soldier's shield. Pull him back into frame. Okay, so when we're going to do a glaze, right now I have got a lot of ink on that brush. Too much ink to do a proper glaze. If I put it on there right now, I'm going to get more of a wash than I am a glaze. So what you need to do is use a paper towel and get rid of most of that fluid. You really just want the brush to be damp with your glaze, not soaking wet. So I get a little bit more of that off there. All right, so this is going to take a couple coats, but I think the effort's well worth it for the amount of gradient that you get thanks to the highlighting that you had done in the first step. So we're gonna go in and we're just gonna start painting up with a light coat into the shield. At this point, you don't have to be terribly careful as to going over the line or anything. I mean, try to keep it in the lines as you can, but I'm not going to try to get too crazy about keeping off of that line because I'm going to be painting him with a rather opaque paint. Alright, so just get in there, make sure you get a nice even coat, and then even with glazes, you need to treat them like paints. Where you want the paint sitting is where you're going to pull your brush to. That's going to be your highest concentration of color. So I want to pull up. Okay, and once you have a coat like that, you really need to let it dry. If you start trying to brush on it right now, you're just going to pull the old glaze off. So at this point, you want to move to another spot on the model. Luckily, we have lots of spots that are going to be red on a Lannister model. I'm going to take just a tiny little bit of glaze to get my brush wet again, and now we're going to start glazing his tabard. Now, when I'm painting these models, I do not do all of them uniform. I like to have some variance in what the soldiers are wearing and change the colors a little bit. It helps break up the monotony of all these soldiers on a tray, and also it's keeping with a slightly more historical standard. And George Martin, when he had done this book series, he said he based a lot of it on the War of the Roses, and at that point in English history, the liveried soldier was just coming into being, and so uniforms were just coming out, but that really wasn't a thing yet. So people would have been wearing some of their own colors, their own identifiers, and they would have just had one thing that really cemented them as a team. Useless medieval fact of the day. Alright, and just try to stay off of the sword scabbard. Yeah, I'm losing brushes here. You just want to come in. And again, nice even coverage. You don't want it pooling. So always just grab a little bit on the brush, just barely get the tip in there, and then come back. Make sure I don't get this out of frame. That was a problem on the first video because I've never tried to film my painting before. It's always just something I've done. Now I feel like I should say something like, there are no mistakes in painting miniatures, only happy accidents. So you can have that. Although no, there probably are mistakes when you're painting miniatures. I slide over a color that I'm already complete with and put it the wrong color over top of it, and I gotta rush in there with a wet brush and try to erase it as best I can. That's a mistake. You can't Bob Ross these. Alright, and we're just gonna keep going around the model, trying to get that nice even coat get now are little slash and puff stuff on his sleeves. Now if you want to on this, and I've seen a lot of people who have been painting these just paint the sleeves one solid color. There's a lot of texture there that works. I like to change the color up and have a different color on the undershirt. It takes a little more time. So if you are worried about the time, want to shave some time, or you can't quite make the hour standard, feel free to just slop the red over this. Or if you want to, you can go red over the top of it and hit it with a darker ink or a darker paint as a wash to kind of get into those recesses and change the color a little bit. Just keep picking out these sleeves. A little bit of sleeve right there, spot there, coming around there, and right there. Okay, so we have our first basic coat there, and we're not done because obviously it's not quite the bright red that we're expecting for the Lannisters, and as you see the shield's still a little splotchy. But guess what? We're using very transparent ink, so we've got to go over it again. A little too much glaze on there. Alright, so you can already see that we're already getting a much brighter red. And now come in here and do another coat over the part of the shield that's in shadow. And I'm already starting to peel some of that glaze off the top, so I need to make sure that dries. As you can see, we've definitely got quite a bit of built-in highlight and shadow already. So let's go into the back of the tabard. Make sure I get it in frame here. Okay, so as we paint this for a second coat, you're going to start noticing that some of your black, even with a very transparent ink, is going to be lost on a second coat, which is fine. If you really want to pop those shadows again, I would suggest something like P3's Seguin Base. It's got a very purple color to it, and that's a good shadow for red. And then to that, I would add to a mix P3's Menoth Black, or not Menoth Black, but Coal Black, I mean, which is a very blue-black color. And that can really deepen your shadows and make your model look more rich. So yeah, it's another one of those things, if you want to add to your model and really make the colors pop, don't leave your shadows based as black. You want to add some color to them. But we are looking for a striking speed paint army, not a competition winner. But if you want to take some more time, you do you. I have done that on some of my models. So on my character models and my attachments for this game, I tend to take a little bit more time painting them. I'm just going to get under that scabbard, pick up a little bit more of my red. Let's hit the front here. You see, I'm not being terribly careful with laying down this color. I'm I'm sure will frustrate me a little later when I go to cut in other colors and I go, man, why did I slop that red all over the place? I've just been a little more careful. But I'm trying to paint around a tripod right now, which gives me that added pressure to not worry so much about things. Okay, so after a second coat, you can already see that the reds are really starting to pop. They're kind of shiny right now because everything's still a little wet. Of course, once you dull coat that, you can take that shine out, but you can see we've already got quite a bit of highlight and shadow building up. So if you're happy with your results at this point, go ahead and stop. We're going to do one more coat here though. We're going to drag down towards the highlight. Make sure I'm in frame. Drag down towards the highlight. Which is, I want the brightest red right on this edge where the sunlight is going to catch the most. And then we're just going to get a nice even coat in the shadows. So we get a nice dark red. Alright, and at that point the shield is just about where I want it. I will go over how to add some additional highlights and shadows on this kind of color once we do the banner. And I will get the banner base coated off camera and just show some of the additional techniques because I'm sure you guys don't need to watch this again. Alright, so I'm just going to go in here. And with this coat, I am trying to lay the color a little bit more where I just have highlights. So if it's a shadow, I'm not really worried about putting any color down on it now. I just want to add more red to where it should be brighter on its own. So I'm going to pull color up towards the top. And here, I'm actually going to pull color down towards the bottom because his little sack here is going to cast shadows. And this is the shadowed side of the model anyhow. Now I'm going to make sure I add some brighter red just to the parts of the sleeves that are facing up to help emphasize that idea of sunlight. Oop, missed one here. Get off camera, I'm sorry, I just can't really see this at the distance I'm trying to paint. Add that little dot of color there. Right in that fold where the sunlight's hitting, we can tell it hits there because of the highlighting that we did with the priming. A little color there. Want some color here. Most of the color should be hitting right here on the tabard and not so much behind the shield because that's going to be in shadow. Alright, so here we are. We have got one solid coat of red now, and this would be the point where for a line model I would likely to be ready to say it is complete. I'm going to go ahead and stop this now. I'm going to do my coat of red on the banner here off camera, and I'm going to try to reposition this camera so we can keep the model more in frame because I know I keep drifting it towards the bottom of the frame so I can actually see it. So I'm going to see if I can't readjust things so we can see it better, but I will be back momentarily. Alright, I've got a base coat of our glaze on the banner here. So you can see we've already got quite a bit of highlighting and shadow, again thanks to the zenithial highlights that we had applied when we first primed the model. But we are going to try to push those reds a little bit more on the banner, just so I can show you some of the different possibilities you have to work with. So here on the wet palette I have done a mix of coal black and sanguine base and just kind of drug the two colors into each other so we've got a decent mix of the two in between. And now I'm going to start adding that onto the banner. Let's see if I can keep this in frame low. You probably want to work on this as flat as possible, and that will help keep the colors where you place them, as well as, it's just a lot easier to work on a closer to two-dimensional space, I think. So we're going to start with some of just the sanguine base. I'm going to get just a little bit on there, and we're going to come in and start hitting some of the areas where we know the shadows to be. So I'm going to add some shadow there. I'm going to come in with a second brush that is damp and just blend out that color. So we don't want anything stark on there. Stark is for the Starks, I guess. Wah wah. Horrible puns. I used to do that. I'm a father. I can use horrible puns. You can't. I can. Just remember that. Alright. So here we go. Just add a little bit more of sanguine in there. I'm going to pull it forward out of that shadow and blend it right back out. I think I blended too much of it out, so I'm going to add just a little bit more color into that wet area. And since it's all wet already, it's really easy to do a wet blend. And do the same thing over here. Just get to the edge. So when you're doing your blends, you don't want to have a super soft blend at these harder edges. We've got a softer edge, like up here, you want a nice smooth blend going out for a ways. Down here, it's a lot harsher of a bend, so we can do a smaller gradient between the two colors. Alright. And we just blend that in. We can do that right here. A little bit more sanguine on here. Come up here. Blend that line. And blend that line. Okay, we got a little bit of a divot right there. I'm going to try to get in there and just go bloop. Looping your paint is important. You need sound effects. Bloop. See, it's so much more fun when you add sound effects. Alright. Blend that out. And just help emphasize that shadow. We got a little bit more of a curve there. I'm just going to blend that shadow. And make sure we've got a little bit of a blend right here by the lion's tail. Okay, so just right there, we helped drop the shadows back a little bit, because we've glazed. That was 3 coats of glaze I did over the top of that, and just like we saw on the tabard and stuff, you start to lose a little bit of the shadow once you get into, say, a 3rd glaze. So I just want to help push those shadows back down. So now we're going to go into the deeper shadows with a mix of the coal black and the sanguine base. And so for here, I want to put this in. Right there's an important one. I really want to drop that shadow back. I'm just going to place that in there. It doesn't look like I have much blending to do. And blend it just a little bit right there. A little bit more of this darker color. And just keep blending it back out. Just trying to pick up a tiny little bit of that paint with the damp brush and use the dampness of the brush to help keep that paint loose while I move it around. Now, with using coal black as your shading color, you are adding a very saturated blue color, which is going to cool down your palette a bit and add that extra color saturation. If you do not want as saturated of a shadow, say you want your guys to look more like they are in a cloudy environment as opposed to brighter sunlight, you might want to use something like Great Cloak Gray. That's got a very nice blue to it, not as much as Coal Black. I would take that and just add a little bit of black paint in addition, and you should have a really good color there that doesn't add as much blue, but still gives you a similar effect. Out that shadow. Don't worry, we'll blend some highlights here too. So I don't think I'm going to go down to full coal black on this. I think that would look a little too artificial. Alright. And so there we've got those shadows. They're still a little shiny thanks to being wet, but those will definitely look more like shadows once we've got this dry and matte coated. One reason to matte coat with these plastic miniatures, I don't think you're going to damage them much without doing some kind of fixative coat, matte coat over the top of it. But yeah, the matte's really just to help take down the shine on the ink. Inks are always going to dry a little shinier than paint, and most people don't like a highly glossy miniature. Okay, so we're going to do some highlights on this. So the highlighting is, I think, more effective. Maybe I'll show it to you on the shield. Yeah. So we're going to do some hard highlights. And for that, we are going to use the Khador Red Highlight color by P3. It's very orange, but we're going to do that, and then we're going to do a glaze of the red ink over it. And that will just help make some of those highlights pop a little bit more. Let's start with the shield. I'm going to take a little bit of that color, and I'm going to come in on the shield, and I really just want to hit that edge, right on my edge highlight. Okay, so that is super bright, but we're going to use that same wet brush blending, try to blend that out. I really just want a bit of a highlight line. It's okay if you want to leave it a little orange. If your models are supposed to be fighting in bright sunlight, orange makes sense. It's reflecting that yellow sunlight. If you don't want it to look so orange, again, just do a nice light red glaze over it and help take out some of that yellow. Come back over here, hit that edge. This one more time. I'm using very little paint so it doesn't take too long to dry. But as with all these things, if you are doing an assembly line, it makes sense to paint that orange line, blend it, go on to your next model. And by the time you come back around, you're ready to put in a second coat and everything's super dry. Same thing with these glazes. If put on a coat, go all the way through your models and come back to that, and your glaze is going to be nice and dry. I'm going to go ahead and hit a little bit on this banner where it should be hitting extra sunlight. So right there, I got some stuff that's hitting top-down sunlight. Looks like we got a little bit right there. Add a highlight right there, just because we want to. Definitely want to hit that stronger and this a little lighter. hard to blend on this thing because with just that light plastic, it really wants to move under the pressure of a brush. Another reason it's nice to put these flat when you're doing it. Oh, and this damp brush, I'm sure you hear my voice changes when I'm not using it. I'm just holding it in my mouth. Need that extra hand. Okay, we're getting to where this paint's just a little too watery. Now, you can say, this paint is too watery, I don't want to use it anymore, and try to get some thicker paint. Or you can start stippling it on there. Sometimes I always like to stipple it. As long as it's close, once I do that glaze, it will work out. So yeah. Alright, sorry about the little video jump there. I had some company stop by. Had to discuss business, but now back to this. We have been doing the Khador highlights on the banner here, and those have had a chance to dry just a bit. I'm going to go ahead and try to hit that one spot that was giving me trouble again. I'll grab a little bit of that orange and make sure everything got moved. Excuse the jitter here on the camera. Like I said, everything got moved because I had to stop everything. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and try to hit that with some orange again. And we'll hit that area right there with some orange. This red highlight really seems to take some of the fluid off of the wet palette and does not like to keep its consistency. At this point it's behaving a lot more like a glaze, but we'll go ahead and use that to our advantage and just drag to where we want our color to stop. And let's do this in a few coats instead of there's lots of ways to skin a cat when you're painting miniatures, and glazes of paint are always a nice subtle way to achieve your effects. Okay, so we have added our orange. See it just a little bit there. So now I'm going to grab some of that red glaze that I'd used before, and I am going to hit just over the top of that orange to tone it back down. We're going to start on the shield so we can see a more drastic effect right away. So we're just going to drop in a little bit of ink, and we can see right there that right where the ink goes over where we had that very orange highlight, now we just have a much brighter, more vibrant red highlight. Now I can see in the camera I got a little spot there that didn't hit the original glaze. I'll go ahead and pull that down. Okay, now let's go ahead and hit those glazes that we put on the standard here. Let's go ahead and drag that right across each of those spots we did orange, and it's going to tone all that yellow tone right out of there, and it's just going to leave us with a brighter red. We don't want to use white when we do something like this to build up a highlight beyond what we have right here, because with all those coats, if we went back to a red or to a white and then did just one coat of red over the top of it, we would either tend to look streaky, or we would get back into the realm of pink, which that's going to be something I actually actively try to achieve when I'm doing the Bolton forces, but for right now I want a nice crimson red. And so there we go. And that is a highlighted shadowed red, and I'm going to go ahead and pause this for a little bit and set everything up so we can start working on the yellows of the banner. Alright, we are back. So the next step we're going to do is hitting some of the gold trim that isn't going to be metallic to work on this model. So to start our yellows for our golden yellows for the Lannister force, we're going to start with a base coat of, let me get it around the bottle, rucksack tan. It's a really nice browned yellow color. So we're going to take just a little bit of that, and first thing I want to do is I'm going to hit some of the trim on this model. So with this kind of trim work, I find it's best to hit, instead of trying to paint directly onto the trim, use the side of the brush. So as you can see, I'm taking just that edge that's got the paint on it and dragging it across the line. It's going to mean you have to do a little bit of physical gymnastics with your model and the angle you hold it so you can get these lines in, but it definitely gives you a nice line when you do it this way. So like I was saying, from here I find this, it's easier to grab your model and hold it upside down when you're hitting these bottom edges. Unfortunately, that's really hard to get on camera, but we will try. Just let the sculpt do the work for you on this. If you start noticing that I got some hair on my brush, here, I pull that off. If you notice that your paint is starting to break, and by that I mean you're getting like dashed paint or something, that means your paint's gotten a little too dry. So just go back, grab some more off the palette. If you're not using a wet palette, that is the point where I would dip my brush into my water and put that brush back on my regular palette and add just a little bit more moisture to my paint, because obviously my paint is getting too dry. I'm just gonna keep coming in here, cutting those edges. Alright, so we've got that yellow done. Let's go ahead while we've got the yellow on the brush and hit some more of these areas that we're going to have. We'll call it Lannister gold. I just hit this bit on his undershirt. And now I want to hit his lion. Now, this might end up being a little sloppier than I would like because I'm using, I would think, too large of a brush for this. This right here is a Winsor Newton Series 7 number 2 brush that has seen better days. I think this is about a decade old now, so it doesn't hold the greatest tip in the world. If we are careful and just lightly drag across the sculpt without putting too much pressure, it should just catch the raised parts of the lion sculpt. Yeah, there's not many times when I'm painting models that I go to, say, a zero brush, but these lions, if you look at the sculpts, that Coolmater or not did a fantastic job of adding little bits of fur coming off of the lion and everything, and if you want those to really pop, you might want to use a smaller brush. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and hit that shield. And this is going to give me a chance to say something about a different ink, because I just noticed a mistake. Okay, so the mistake I just noticed, if we look right there, we've got highlight, and then there's that little gap. I don't know if it's coming across on the camera or not, but there's that little gap there where his body and feet are. Let me paint around it. That is white. I just did not get paint in there. That's what I get for being sloppy. Oh, yeah, you can kind of see it poking out there. So, one of the great inks I found when you're working on Lannisters, we're going to use this on the banner as well, is another P3 product, their brown ink. Their brown ink is brown in the loosest sense of terms. It is a very red brown. Put some of that ink down. This one on my thumb while I'm at it. Whatever, I'm already covered in paint. Alright, so I'm going to take a smaller brush. I'm going to grab some of this brown ink and I'm just going to drop it right in that spot that I missed. And I will get a nice dark red shadow color. This ink is also what I'm going to use to do some edging. So it'll help that gold pop just a little bit more. I bring some ink in. You can also use this ink to help emphasize your shadows on your tabards, and also you could use it on exclusively on your banner to help push shadows. It doesn't give you the nuance of using the blues, but sometimes we don't want nuance, we just want a darker color. Go ahead and drop some of that there. Yep, sorry, I'm going out of order, but that is how this kind of stuff works sometimes. All right, I'm getting stuff onto the belt. As you can see right there in the belt. Let's see if I can get that into frame. Make it look decent on the camera. So it's already got a nice brown color on it. You can use this method to do your belts. Actually, we'll use this real quick on his pouch. I've been doing all my Lannister pouches with just the brown ink from P3. It uses some of the highlighting we've already built on from the priming to highlight the browns, and it gives you a nice red-brown leather. I don't do it on all of the belts because I like a little bit of differentiation between the leathers to make them look like they're from separate manufacturers. They didn't get all their stuff from just one craftsman making everything out of leather. But again, do what you want to. If it's easier, and it would save you time if you just use the ink and skip some of the other steps I'm going to have with browns. But if you want to have the belt stand out a little bit more, I would wait and do that with, as I will describe it here in a little bit. But since we've got our brown ink, I do use the brown ink on my Lannister crossbowmen. My crossbows were done with it, and with these, I use it to make the scabbards. And again, it's a nice red-brown color, so we're going to use that to help fit the Lannister theme. Keep them all thematic, and the ink will use that highlighting, and so the top edges of it will definitely be a brighter red-brown, and the bottoms will be a dark brown. So you get a nice dyed leather look where they didn't have a strong enough dye to get it super crimson. Coming off the camera, I'm sure there. I can't just get it in there. So then we have, you see that the highlight on the top didn't really have to work for that at all. It just pops with the ink. So you can do all your leathers like that, as I was saying, and it's a nice, easy way to take advantage of the inks. We're going to base coat, when I'm doing this for the tutorial, I'm going to base coat these leathers in a khaki color and then throw a umber type ink over it so we get a dark yellowy brown, kind of break up some of the model. We're also going to use this ink, however, to hop in these cracks. So just go ahead and use that to drop in and kind of turn red those areas around the yellow, what would you call that, rope work or embroidery that they do on this. You don't want it to be bright red because then it will kind of wash out the yellows that we're going to be putting on it here in a moment. So by using a darker color, it's going to help the yellows pop. They used to call it back in the GW heavy metal type painting black lining, and black lining itself looks pretty cartoony. So don't use black. Use colors that are dark but not black and are closely related to what you're painting, and then you get the contrast of a black line without that cartoony look to it. Okay, so we've gone over that and helped make those areas pop. I'm gonna also real quick come in, and we got the sunlight coming down this direction, so I'm going to drop a little bit of this ink on the edges of this lion that would be facing away from the light to kind of help push my shadows just a little bit more. Of course, you could do this with your paints just like we were doing the edging, and you will get a smoother transition, a little more homogeneous, but again, we are looking somewhat for speed with these models and not so much to get the world's best looking model. All right, so that's that. Let me go ahead and rinse my brush, and we're gonna get back to the yellows. I so rudely interrupted. Okay, I'm gonna go back to paint's got a little too much water into it now from the wet palette. I'm not getting as much coverage as I would hope for. It's doing okay now. Let's go back and try to hit that tail. There we go. Easy does it. And there's the tail. Okay, now we're going to do that paw. And finish the other paw. All right, there we are. Okay, so we've got some yellow there. You can see a little bit of white on the camera. I'm okay with there being a highlight there, but not that much of a highlight. And okay, let's take a look. All right, that's not looking too bad. Some of those other spots are going to get covered once I actually come in with a brighter yellow highlight. Okay. And we're going to do much the same thing again here on the banner. So we've got this edging, and again we're going to use the sculpt and just come in and hit those with yellow. All right, so I dragged a little too hard there. So if you make a mistake like that, just come in with a wet brush and just brush away that paint, and you can fix your mistake. If only all of life's mistakes were that easy to fix. to add some more paint to my palette because this stuff's getting a little too wet. If you notice that your paint isn't going on opaque enough, or as opaque as you like, you are probably getting a little bit too much moisture through your wet palette. You can throw another piece of dry paper towel on it to help slow down some of the moisture, or you can just put a little bit more from your pot. So I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit more from my pot. I'm going to continue doing the edging here with the rucksack tan, and we will come back once I have the flag done in rucksack tan. Alright, so I have gone through and did a quick base coat of that rucksack tan to get a good gold color all over the model. A couple of spots that need to get hit real quick. I'm seeing under camera light. Go ahead and hit those up real quick. Bear with me. Okay. So, next thing we're going to do is the typical steps for these kind of models. And that is going to be to add my shading. Last step you want to do is highlighting. That way you can help erase some of the extra shadow if you need to. So first thing we're going to shade is the Lannister lion on his chest. So with the direction of the sunlight, as you can see where it's hitting his helmet, it's definitely coming from this direction. That means we're going to put this bit under shadow. So I'm going to use a little bit of watered down P3 brown ink. I'm just going to come in and place it in there with my brush. So I want to use water and not use any kind of water additives that break surface tension. Usually when you're doing a wash, you want to kind of stop that surface tension so you can get a nice coat of your ink and get it to sink into all the crevices. I'm not so worried about that right now. I just want to drop some color in and leave the color exactly where I put it. Is that going to be the world's smoothest blend? No, but again, we're looking for a tabletop model. I'm going to come in here and take just a little bit of that edge off. And there we go. That's in shadow. I'm going to do the same shadowing technique here with the Lannister line on the shield. Same brown ink. Now if you want cooler shadows, you can use a cooler, more umbery brown. On like my Clegane troops, I use, because I don't want them to be as warm as the Lannisters, I use like, is it Umbral Umber or Battlefield Brown to mix my gold shadows, and that works great for those models. But here I want to add a little bit more color, blend that back out a little bit. Alright, so we've got a quick little shadow on that lion. Cut in here just a tad. Alright, there, just a little bit more shadow there. Okay, so we've got some shadow on the lion there. Now we're going to do the same thing on the banner. So we're going to take our ink. This one we're going to have to blend a little bit more. So we're going to drop our ink where we know there's going to be a shadow. And take a wet brush, and we're, instead of pushing it, pulling it out like we do with the paint, we're going to push it closer to the shadow. So with the inks, you're pushing, where with a paint, you want to pull it. Now we're just going to make sure a little bit more ink there, make sure it's wet. I'm just going to push it in. And once I push it in, I take the remaining bit of color and smooth it out. A little more ink. I pulled too much ink off with that technique there. There we go. Okay. So we just took that shadow and dropped the gold into the shadow. So that's our one big shadow. The next one is just going to be here. At the second fold, we're going to hit the tail. wick some of that ink off and go ahead and place our color, push that in, and we will dab away and push that in right there, and push it in right there. And then I just need to get that paw. And we'll push that in. Okay. Now we're going to do the same thing, hit some of this trim. Base coating some of my red got used up, or got covered up, I should say. So we'll use this as partially to help bring out some of that black lining we did earlier, as well as do our shading. Now you might be thinking, why not just use the zenithial highlighting with the yellow like we did with the red? A good yellow color is usually fairly transparent. Or I should say opaque. So because it's got so much white in it, if it was transparent, it would be showing through all the other colors and would never read as yellow. I tried doing some yellow inks on some of the Clegane troops, and it tends to go a little bit green as it goes over black. It gets bright yellow over the white, and you don't get much of a gradation between them because it's just too transparent. And to fix that with acrylic paints, there's a lot of white and opaque colors in the binder. So we have to deal with that with the yellows, and that makes yellow not a prime candidate for this kind of technique. We will use it a bit, but it's going to be a little bit more of a complicated process. And that will be in a later tutorial with the Clegane troops. I was going to do it with Gregor, but then I painted up the mountain that rides, had a lot of fun with that, painted up the regular Gregor, saying, oh, I'll just save the alternate model for a tutorial. And before I knew it, I was painting that one too, because those are just really good models. But I still got a lot of his foot soldiers, and we'll kind of do the same thing like we're doing here. And work on one of the bannered soldiers. Alright, I'm just going to try to just drop a little bit of ink. Use my finger to wipe that away. Now we got some decent black lining there. Drop my color in here. Push those yellows back. You can almost look at shading as sculpting, where you're taking away. By darkening colors, you can send them into the background and help push your three-dimensional space artificially. Pull that away. All right. Okay, so there you see we have pushed our stuff back. I'm going to hit the other side real quick and get my highlights ready for the yellow, and then we'll continue. Alright, I'm back, and we're going to go ahead and highlight up this yellow just a little bit. So to highlight the yellows, we are going to use this time P3's Moldy Ochre. As you can see, it's a nice desaturated yellow. This will be the last step for Lannister gold. And we're going to start on the shield. So once we're working on the shield, we really just want to pick out little bits that we want to be brighter. And then use our wet brush to come in and blend those highlights. So, as you can see, just kind of help pop the yellow back out a little bit. I'm going to hit this edge where the sunlight is catching. Help emphasize that highlight that we have going there. And there we go. Nice and easy way to help push the three-dimensionality. I can't even say it. Dimensionality of it. There we go. Dimensionality of it. There we go. That's the word that I'm making up. Dimensionality? I don't know. Excuse the weird conversation. I tend to talk to myself a lot while I'm painting anyhow. Alright, so we've got now the Lion's chest highlighted. I'm going to use this color to help pop just a little bit of his trim in certain spots where I really want it to look like it's catching some light. These are small enough spots that I don't really worry about doing a proper blend on this kind of model. Alright, so there's that, and now we're going to do some decent blends on our Lannister lion. Okay, so up here on the banner, I'm just going to go ahead and we're going to do the same wet blending technique we've been doing, and we're just going to pick out the highlights. So, going to smooth blend right here. Come back out. Push it back in. There we are. Nice smooth blend. Now we're going to hit this other edge a little more starkly as we drop into shadow. And take that leftover paint that's still on the brush and blend it down the paw into a little bit more yellow. Then you just come in and blend it. So wobbly. I didn't have the wobble problem on the other banner I did for the guardsman because the plastic snapped and it did not want to glue back together, so I ended up switching it out for some brass rod, which does make the model a little more durable, I think. Alright, now we're going to highlight that edge. And do the same thing here. Now we're going to blend that out. I lost a little bit of my line there, so I'm going to come back in here, grab some of my ink, and try to carefully drop it in there. I'll pop that line back out. Okay, and we're going to... Alright, my apologies. I lost a little bit of that last recording. I ran out of space on my card, so... There, okay. So I lost a little bit there, but I think I'd covered all of the basics on highlighting the yellow, and so we're looking at the model looking like this. So we are going to do something pretty quick with this next step, and that is going to be doing our blacks on the model. So our leathers. Grab a larger brush. Okay, so for this what we're going to do is we are going to make more of a wash out of coal black. So I'm going to take some of that medium that I had from earlier, and then I'm going to grab up that coal black. And it's been sitting here on the palette, so it's pretty wet. So let me get this in frame. You can see how wet that is. It's got a lot of water in it. So bleed some of that off. Hold on, so let's see if I can show you what I'm talking about. So a little bit of capillary action here on the paper. It spreads out like that. It's nice and watered down. Okay. So we're going to use this, and why I added the mediums. I want it to wash, but I also want it to stay in place and tint some too. And I'm going to use it to tint his boots. These are going to be black at the end of the day. So we're just going to come over this real quick. And do a quick coat of this kind of dark greeny blue color. Why I use this is, it's going to show, hopefully it'll read as a slightly shiny black leather. I don't want like patent leather super shine. I don't want to look like wearing stripper boots. But we are looking for a little bit of sky reflection on there, as well as black leather. It tends to be a really dark blue dye anyhow. So the highlights will read more blue on leather. So, okay. So the boots are done in that blue. You can see you've got a nice blue boot. And we're going to do the same thing now on his tabard here. I want to darken that up. So I'm going to come in here and cut in with this blue. Just like that. So we've got, I'm going to go clean that up just a little bit. It was so watery, a little bit of it came down onto my yellow. I can pull that off with a dry brush. And there, now that's gonna read as a dark gray blue, and while we're at it, we will go ahead and cut in that undershirt stuff that we left from the cut and slashes at the beginning. So with how wet this is, I really just got to put a drop of it in, and it is wet enough that it'll just fill in there, right there, a little bit right there. Got that one already, and right there. Okay, so now we've added all of these blacks. So you might be saying at this point, but that doesn't look black. And it doesn't yet, but we are going to wait for this to dry, and then we are going to use one of the GW products I keep around, which is just the Nuln oil. The matte stuff does work great, and it will sink into the areas I want shadowed, and it will make that read more as a black. Alright, so that is done. And next, let's look at doing, well, actually, I think I've just decided I want him to have a black feather too. So we're going to go ahead and hit his feather real quick too. Why not? So just go ahead and slop some of that color onto the feather, and then we'll wait for that to dry. Okay, so next we're going to go ahead and hit our silvers. So for the Lannisters, we are going to start with a base of, here we are, Pig Iron by P3, and we are going to use that coal black for our shadows, and then we are going to highlight it up with this paint right here, which is Vallejo Model Air Silver. So we're going to grab some of this metallic, and we're going to start putting it on. Alright, so you can't, metallic's another one of those colors like yellow. It doesn't go over white on its own very well, and if you try to do a wash with this, you're going to get mixed results at best. So we're going to go ahead and just place it down on these parts and get a nice base coat on, and try to remember where our highlights and shadows are on the model. So if you have problems remembering that kind of stuff, or you can't really read it from what you've already painted, I would suggest taking a photo of it with your phone or your camera, and then you can reference back to that as needed to see where your highlights were falling. So we're just going to go ahead and cut in here and base this metal. I am not going to use the Nuln oil on my steels, which I do on some other models because I like the Starks I've been painting. I do an oil over the metals to make a darker metal. But for the Lannisters, they have those mines over there at Casterly Rock and Lannisport. They've got some money going for them, so I figure they've got the wherewithal to polish up their steels. Alright, yeah, we'll go ahead and hit that helmet. Helmet's done. Let's get this second pauldron. Going off camera again. Alright, so we need to cut in right here for his bracer. Make sure that's going to read as metallic, and get this last bracer. Alright, there we go. Okay, so we have a base coat here of the pig iron, and he's reading as fairly metallic now. Rinse that brush, dry it off. I don't want to add any extra water when I take out this color. So the next step is going to be to use our standby coal black for shading. Actually change my brush. So one I've got, I want to use for the blending. It's a little bigger so it holds more moisture. Okay, grab a little bit of that coal black. Okay. Don't want my brush sopping with it. Alright, so what we're going to do, let's start with the helmet. I think that's where you see the most drastic effect. So if we remember from where it was highlighted, the brightest highlight was here at the top and then along the edge. So we are going to hit blue right in there in between. So I'm going to come in and paint just a little splot of blue. Just like that. And now we're going to blend that out. Add just a little bit more towards the bottom. Just make sure it's wet. Yeah, it's still pretty wet, but if you are doing these as a batch, your metallic will be dry and that won't stay as wet. So it's a good practice. A little bit more. And we want the blue towards the back. So we just do a nice blend like that, and now we've got a blue shadow. Alright, we're going to work on the bever here. I'm going to send that into shadow right there. I'm going to push this corner in to shadow. Fortunately, my light here is shining in such a way it's kind of hard to see where I'm placing the stuff when it's so wet. And I'm getting a lot of glare. Just a second. Okay, put that in, a little bit into that corner. Okay, I'm gonna have to go ahead and hit this other side of the helmet. Unfortunately, again, because of the lights, this one's gonna be sort of hard to see with his banner here. But on this one, we want more shadow than what we did on the first side, because this side should be fairly dark. sure that we've still seeing a little bit of that metallic fleck coming through on, let me make sure I'm not auto-focusing here. I think I am. There we are. Okay, so I want to make sure that a little bit of the metallic fleck is still showing through on the edges on that side, but it should be pretty much blue. And this, we have a lot more metallic fleck showing. Do a very quick, easy one right here on the bracer. And we're just going to come in and blend that out. Do a lot more on the other side. There we go. So that's dropped down. I'm gonna pretty much make these blue. They're behind the shield. And now it is time to do pauldrons. Let's do this pauldron first. There is this edge here. I want to do the edge closest to what's taking light and the darkest blue. And then I blend it back. Same thing on this back edge. I want the darkest shadow at the top and the brightest part of the shadow will actually, where the least shadow is going to be towards where the helmet's sitting. And why we do that is because when sunlight bounces off of the helmet from these highlights right here, it is going to catch on that pauldron and give it some reflected light. So we want almost pure coal black on the, let's see if I can get that to come in. Yeah, it's kind of hard to see on here. But you want almost coal black on that edge of the pauldron that is facing towards the helmet, the top edge, and then it should go down into reading a little bit more as metallic. Okay. And we are going to put just a little bit here on this corner. This we got more shadow to the back. We are going to put just a little bit here on the front. That's curving away from where the sunlight's hitting. And we're going to do the same thing with the sides on those lanes of the pauldron there. Just go ahead and slap down some blue. Quick blend. A little bit of blue. And a quick blend. Okay. And finally, we're going to do this more round pauldron. I'm going to hit everything around those rivets on the back in blue. And yeah, my camera got moved again when I ran out of memory, and now it's not keeping my stuff in frame where I want it to be. Okay. Add a little bit more blue there. I'm going to come in and pull it back away. Wet brush. Okay. Now we're going to do the same thing here on the front. And we will blend that out. Leaving a highlight on the front, or on the top of the pauldron. And then the lames, same thing we did on the other lames. We're going to pretty much drop these ones into shadow. Only the edges should read as metallic. Doing your shadows in a matte paint as opposed to a darker metallic does reduce shine and help it read as more metallic because it'll emphasize the areas where the light's hitting and giving you better shine. Alright, so there we go. We can already see that as the light's hitting it, we've got some very natural shadows. And the highlights read the way they should. But we're not done. We're going to take this one more step up. I'm going to use some of the silver paint. And we're going to use this as a highlight. Usually you don't wet blend your metallics. The Vallejo Model Air Silver is a very liquid paint, and I find that you can blend, and I'm really just trying to put it down there because it's almost pure metallic highlight, or metallic flake. So you can just kind of push it around and brighten up anywhere where you want. So we're going to start with the helmet, and I want to do this back edge because it's going to catch some sunlight. So I'm just going to paint in that edge, and then wet brush. I'm just going to bring that across and kind of blend it into the blue. I'm going to hit the edge of that visor. Make sure it reads as catching light. A stray hair in that brush. Alright. Now we're going to build up this highlight here at the top where the sunlight's hitting the brightest. I'm going to shine that up with a lot of the silver. And now we're going to blend those edges in. And there you go. Just like that. Now we have a very shiny helmet. And we can put a little bit of a hit here. A hit here. And there. I like to leave these rivets as steel. I used to paint a lot of my rivets in gold and brass, but after having studied armor quite a bit, it's not something that really happened all that much. Now, unfortunately, my shadow wasn't quite dry, and so it's making those dots bleed a little bit. I'll go in and clean them back, clean them out a little bit here later. All right, so next we're going to highlight that edge of the pauldron. And blend. Now we're just going to hit the top edges of the lames. So now we've got some highlight there. All right. Next, let's go ahead and hit that bracer. That's a pretty easy one to do. Really just want that edge right here, this little spot here to where it would naturally catch sunlight. Go ahead and highlight that up. And quick little blend. And a quick little blender on the back. There we go. Alright, other side of the helmet. That edge should still be catching some more of that direct down light that we have coming at this model. So I want to paint just the edge. And then we're going to blend that out. And as we're doing more of just a top lighting on this side, we're going to hit just the top little bit of the soleil here. Soleil? I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce that. Is it based off a French word? Is it purely an English word? I'm not sure of its etymology. But soleil, something like that. So the style of helmet. And we polish that up with just a little bit more silver. And I'm just going to add a little bit more pure silver right up there. And make sure I cut in just that edge of the visor. So now, as you can see, getting a much shinier look to the metallic after dulling it down with that blue. Alright, last spot that needs to get a little bit of this highlight is this other pauldron. I'm going to go ahead and just hit the top a little bit. This one doesn't need much. And we're just going to soften those edges up just a little bit. And again, at this point you can come in and use that same silver to highlight up your rivets. And those will read as extra bright with the shading that we'd already put in there. So there we go. That is the silver metallics. Alright, so coming into the next step, I am going to work on the fleshes and then we're going to finish up that black. Because the flesh is going to have to dry in between steps. So, first thing we're going to do is start with our base coat for the flesh. I'm just going to use Midland's Flesh, whatever your medium flesh tone you want to use. Some of the other war games I play, like War Machine, like characters tend to be a lot more racially diverse, but Martin's been pretty clear as to who's from where in this book, and I want to keep things as canonical as possible. So we're going to go for a very Caucasian looking flesh tone. If there's desire to learn how to do any other flesh tones, just drop a comment in and I will do a tutorial on some other flesh tones. Alright, so right now we're just looking for, it's almost straight out of the pot. Not really watering this down at all because I'm looking for maximum coverage. And I just want to hit the flesh tones. And you just let it sink into all the cracks there. We just want solid, almost plastic looking coverage, if that makes sense. I don't want it to look like flesh yet, just flesh colored plastic. We're going to shade it and highlight it here in a moment. Alright, that's a fairly decent coat. You'll notice flesh tone doesn't go on perfectly smooth the first coat. You can do a second coat after this one dries, but I'm going to go ahead and just shade it once this dries. And once that's shaded, I'm going to cut back in, and that should help cover up some of the blotchiness as I do my 2 layers of highlight with the base coat and then with my highlight color for the flesh. Just going to go ahead and hit this other hand a little bit. Okay, there we go. We've got both hands hit. Okay, so while that dries a bit, now we're going to go ahead and hit those blacks that I said we were going to hit earlier. So the blue is dry. I'm going to pull out this Nuln Oil, and this is pretty much right out of the pot. So open your pot, take that little bit that collects at the top of the cap, and we are going to just drop it onto the boots. And so it will naturally, because of it being a shade, it will flow into the cracks and the low spots of the boot, which is exactly what we want. And it will leave those raised areas alone, which, because we did a glaze of the blue, will still read as blue. And being that the blue is a little washy at the same time, the shadows, as this black isn't completely opaque, are going to read as a very dark blue. Alright, yeah, I'm just going to slap that on there, and we're going to do the same thing up on a little feather here. So I'm about ready to paint my second squad of these, and I'm wondering if I should go through and cut off the feathers on some of them to kind of make them look different. So if you have any thoughts on that, please let me know. Alright, so that just needs to dry up, and that'll be good to go. So now while that's drying, I'm going to go ahead and use some of P3's Flesh Wash. Using just as directed on the label. So I'm going to place some of that down on my palette. Go down to more than I wanted. Alright, so this, we're going to grab it, and we're just going to drop some of the shading onto our flesh. You don't want to too much, because it's, as you can see right there in the hand, it's coming out brown. So dab some onto the paper towel, and then place it back in there, and you should have about the right amount at that point. And this should be just enough to help pop out some of those fingers. Yeah, stay tuned. I will have other tutorials where we get a lot more into flesh, but this will be enough to get you started. It just so happened this model had some great areas to do red on, just not as much flesh as some of the other guardsmen. But this will be enough to do tabletop guardsmen anyhow. Okay, so now that's got to dry up. And while that waits to dry up, let's go ahead and get started on something else. Why wait? All right, so we're going to take the color Hammerfall Khaki, kind of a greeny yellow beige color. And we are going to take this almost straight out of the pot. I don't want to dilute it. Just what's on the wet palette will be enough. And we're going to use this for the belt. So just come in and hit your leathers. Now, of course, you can leave your leather this color, which I think gives you a nice little rawhide look, which is okay. We are going to shade this with some sepia ink. All right, so we got the shield. Let me get the bottom piece of the shield that comes across here that you can see. Go ahead and hit this. That's a little too much of a highlight there. Let's go ahead and just wash that little mistake with some of the brown ink. I'll blend it in. Where's the highlight? Here, this is off camera, I'm sorry, it's just I can't quite reach around the shield and play around all this equipment. All right, there we go. All right, so we've got the leather done on the belt, and we're gonna drop some ink on that here in a moment. But right now, I'm going to take a mix of the Midland flesh that we used before and a little bit of Rin flesh, about a 50-50 mix. Rin flesh is a much more pink flesh tone by Privateer. All right, so we've got it on the brush. You can see what I'm looking at. And we're going to use that to, whoop, sorry about that, to pick out some of the details and some of the highlights on the flesh. So you want to be fairly controlled with this one. Maybe a little more on my brush, because we want to be able to pick up the fingers, and if we slop this on there, we're going to undo some of the flesh wash we had just done. And I don't like making work. I'm a very naturally lazy person. All right, and then we're going to kind of bring that color across the knuckles just a little bit, brighten those up, and there we go. And we're going to do the same thing on the other hand. Really just kind of hit the top of that hand, maybe just the edge of those fingers there at the knuckles, and there we go. All right, so we've got our skin there, and that's good to go. Okay, so the next step before we're going to take a little break is I'm going to take some of what I already showed earlier, the FW sepia ink, fill that stopper up, put a drop of that down, and that is going to be what we use for the leather. All right, so take that, you're gonna add some medium. You want it to stay in place and not run all over the place. And we're gonna go ahead and brush that in on top of dark brown leather where the ink will go towards the center just a little bit, which will make it look like the edges of the leather have lost some of their dye because of wear. Just sort of what we're looking for. Hit that leather strap in the shield. Hit that bottom piece of the leather strap. And there we go. All right, so we've got a little bit more color onto the leather, and we are going to pause right there because I need to charge up this camera. I'll be back in a bit. All right, well, while I was off camera, I went ahead and painted up the base real quick. Since it's just base coating, it wasn't anything special. I didn't think I needed to do it. Just black paint on the bevel, and then bloodstone is the color I use for the base. I'm not planning on leaving the bases just brown like this. They're going to get flocked and static grassed, and I want everybody to look like they're on a grassy field, but just in case there's any spottiness to the glue or grass doesn't quite stick, I want it to look like maybe there's some dirt underneath of it. But to help bring out the texture, the next thing I do is put just a little bit of that sepia ink that we were using before with some water. Watered down sepia, and we're just going to go ahead and spread that out onto the base. And it's going to puddle up, and you're just going to drag that puddle around the base. You don't want to leave any puddles anywhere. You just want it to sink into the little crevices and help give some texture. As we come along the edge, that'll help mask any spots that maybe didn't get enough paint on the edge between the brown and the black. And it's showing primer still. So we'll color those up so you don't really see them. Just go through there. And there we go. Alright, so we have some texture on there, and that'll dry up and give us something sort of dirty looking. Okay, so the last thing left that we have to do on here is our golds. So I'm not going to bore you with outlining some of the edging in gold. I plan on doing this bit on the pauldron that's raised up in gold. The rims on the bracers are going to be in gold. There is a bit of trim on that pauldron that I'm going to do in gold. But on the helmet, there's a little stripe of metal there, there's a stripe of metal on the back, and then this ring right there that holds the feather. I'm going to do that in gold. But the big thing that's going to be gold is the metallics on the shield. So we can go ahead and take a look at that. We can see that our brightest pieces are going to be that highlight edge right there and there. Right there's a good highlight. That's very bright. We got sort of a line right there, and that's right there should be a bright highlight because if the sun comes in like that, that should hit that. And then we got just a little bit of edge there. And then we can see where all the dark shadows are. So we just need to keep that in mind as we start base coating. So we're going to do a base coat in Privateer Press's P3 Roulet Gold. Go ahead and get some of that on my brush. And I'm putting that on my wet palette right next to where I've got the silver, because we're going to use the silver to build the highlights. Alright, so we're just going to go ahead and... Oh, another thing I didn't mention that's going to be gold is these pieces on his scabbard there. Hold on just a second. I just noticed something. I got a little too sloppy putting in the base coat on the base. Okay, so back to the task at hand. Just going to go ahead and give this a good solid base coat. And this should show how easy it is to do some decent looking highlights with your metallics. Help give them a little bit more pop than just painting straight color. Okay, so So you gotta be very careful because we want to get into that edge without touching the red base of the shield. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and get that lion done. Get around that rivet. Come down there. Okay, now let's hit this front. Hit the side here. Okay, another weird gap, but yeah, I got a phone call I had to take. So everything got paused, and while I was talking, I went ahead and did most of the gold edging on here. We're gonna go ahead and pick up where we were on the shield. Okay, so we're gonna take some of that roulette gold now, and we're gonna build the highlights first. I know I usually highlight second, but let's go ahead and do these highlights first. All right, so we take the roulette gold, and we're gonna take some of the silver, and we're gonna make a very pale gold color. And we are going to hit that color where we saw the highlights. Okay, so the highlights are going to be right there. To that line. So we want to emphasize the sun hitting it. We're going to hit the tops of the rivets. Hit that line right there. And we're going to try to hit these edges where it's going to catch extra sunlight. We're going to catch this edge right here. And we're going to hit just these top pieces of the lion. Right there. Go ahead and silver that up. And we're going to silver up the top here of the shield. Let's take another look at it, make sure there's nothing else I want to hit. I'm going to pop this rivet just a little bit. Boop. Remember, sound effects are important. Rivets require boops. Boop. Second boop. All right. Okay, so we have got our highlights on there. You can see that that's catching a little more light. And while we've got the highlight color, I'm going to go ahead and just quickly hit some of this trim right there where it would catch. Hit a little bit right there. Just anywhere where I know a lot of light would hit that gold. Really set it off. Okay. And I got a little bit of... Cut those back in. Okay. So, we got that. And now the next step, we are going to use another GW product. This time, let me find my container. We're going to use the Agrix Earthshade. And this is going to be how we shade our metallic golds. We're just going to take this, load up our brush, and sort of like what we did with the inks, we're going to go ahead and dab right here and let the capillary action and the water tension that's in there kind of bring it up and create a heavy shadow right there. Okay, for the line, we're just going to go ahead and brush it and let it sink into the crevices. Need to get a little more. If you know how these GW pots are, the lids like to go halfway closed on you all the time. So I gotta take my hands off the miniature holder here to get in there. Okay, we're gonna put that in the shadow. I'm gonna put that in. Brush the underside with my paintbrush. There we go. Add a little bit more there. A little bit more there. And we're going to tap some of this just into the bottoms of those rivets to help them pop. Coming to the other side, or just brush this whole bit here. Hit that. And time to get a little bit more. And we'll just go ahead and hit the undersides of the gold on the scabbard there. Okay. If that one gets a little sloppy, the scabbard's already brown, it's not going to matter much. All right, and so there we go. Let's see how that is looking. I need to clean up my metal right there. I see a little bit of red in the gold. That's okay. We'll pull out a fine brush and just slide some of that silver in there. But yeah, that's about how it should look. Get a liner. Get some of that color. And let's go ahead and very carefully cut in that edge. Now just to help push it home, grab just a little bit of pure silver. And let's hit that edge. And just lightly get the top of those rivets. And if you want to add a little bit more sparkle, you can grab the top lip of this bit of trim and cut that in with the silver. There we go. So here we've got the model. I think we're at a point where we can say this is done, and minus finishing up the basing with some flock, he is ready for the tabletop. I hope you enjoyed that. I know that takes longer than an hour, but we were working on a banner guy, and I think these ones are a little more important. But as you can see, this isn't something that if you are working an assembly line should take you terribly long to bust through a squad of models. I hope you enjoyed that. Leave any comments that you have below. Let me know what else you guys want to see. I think my next tutorial is going to be on working on the Cleganes, and it's really just going to focus on Clegane yellow and Clegane armor. All right, thanks a lot.